Hey there, and welcome back to Crypto Clarified. This is the podcast series where we come together from time to time to discuss the most captivating headlines and trends in the crypto space. My name is Benjamin Dean, and I'm director in Wizardsarine's digital assets team. Today I'm joined by Kevin Loaec, who is the CEO at Wizardsardine. Yep, that's it. It's going to be a great episode, but before we do it, social media shout-outs. US listeners, check out wisdomtreeprime.com. Go to the app stores, check it out. You won't be disappointed. Hit subscribe and share. Subscribe because then the episodes just turn up in your phone right up to the heat death of the universe, which is a great thing. Makes your life simpler. As always, you can find me on the Bird app at Benjamin Dean. Look, you can call it X, Twitter, I don't care. It's always going to be the Bird app to me. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about two topics that everyone knows I love talking about. One of them is this little thing you may have heard about called Bitcoin. And the second one is about security with Bitcoin. I've got Kevin here. He's definitely an OG in the space. We're going to go through a bit on his background as always. We're going to talk something called Miniscript and the features that unlocks. And then, of course, we're going to finish up by looking to the future, because if there's anything we love more than clarifying on the show, it is the future. Shout out first to James and Sam in compliance. Don't hit the 30-second button, folks. You don't want to do that. This is the most entertaining part of the episode. Before I begin, I need to say the following to clarify: the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of Wisdom Tree and Wizardsardine, and subject to change. Anything we present in this podcast is not intended to be relied upon as a forecast, research, nor as investment or tax advice. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are not a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. Reliance upon them is the sole discretion of the listener. Please remember, past performance is no indication of future results. Now we go on to the fun stuff. Kevin, you've taken the time out. It's summer where you are in the world, in the Azores. It's summer here in London. I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Happy to be here.
Now, you and I met, I was doing the math today. It was something like 7 years ago when we were both living in Lisbon. You were running the Block Cafe with Mark Zeller, who's also an awesome guy. That was a fantastic space, and that experience was, on my end, very, very informative. Can you give the listeners a little bit of a feel for the last few years, what you've been working on, what you've been interested in, and how we ended up back on this show today?
Yeah, so I've been working on Bitcoin for a very long time now, always on the security space. My very first Bitcoin startup was around hardware wallets. They were not called hardware wallets at the time. That's a long time ago. Then I started a consulting firm when I was kind of not sure if the market was big enough in Bitcoin to actually support a company with just retail clients at the time. We were talking about Bitcoin being less than a $1 billion market, right? And so yeah, consulting business that worked out pretty well, doing basically technical work for larger institutions like large banks and things like that around Bitcoin. And then through this consulting firm, the last clients we had was a hedge fund, and they required a self-custody option. So they wanted to be able to self-custody their own funds while only having two people doing the trading day to day. So two people being in control of the funds, but they didn't want to have to trust these two people. So they wanted to be able to add some restrictions on top. So let's say typical amounts limits per day or per transaction. They wanted to have restrictions on business hours only, no transactions in the weekend, things like that. So it was a very interesting project because nothing like this exists in Bitcoin without trusted parties, and that's what they wanted. They wanted it without any trusted party. And so yeah, that was a big project, and I ended up designing Revolt. Revolt is a vault architecture on Bitcoin. So this is the self custody I was just describing, and we started a company called Wizardsardine to build this product, and that's basically how I ended up being here. So now we're working on something different called Liana, and we are going to talk about it later. But yeah, that's my story.
Cool. Well, before we get into those details, which are going to be super interesting, you have to explain to people how you landed on Wizardsardine as the name for the business.
Yeah, well, that's Portugal. So in Portugal, well, in Europe in general, the European Union puts a restriction on all the countries to be able to like for people to start a business. I think it's in less than a day. I think the European law is that every country should be able to create a business in less than a day, in less than 24 hours, and then it's up to each country to implement their own version of that. And so Portugal wanted to be doing a big thing, and so they were like, okay, we're gonna do it in 1 hour. And so there is this system in Portugal where you can basically register a business in 1 hour. But because Portugal is not the best at doing, digitalization of the economy and the public services, it's still very much human based, and you have to queue and get a ticket and wait for your turn. Instead, their solution to be able to create a business in less than an hour was to register a ton of shell companies in advance. And so you show up, you basically get your shell company from them, and they basically tell you, hey, we created your business in less than an hour. And so these shell companies have a lot of names, and it's automatically generated. And so you can find the list in the Ministry of Justice website of Portugal, where you have the list of all of these randomly generated names for companies. And then when you show up to your appointment to get a business, you just pick one, right? And so yeah, Wizardsardine just sounded great for us, so we just picked this one. So that's
Yeah,
the that's the story about it.
it's perfect. And hey, for such a process to come up with something so awesome at the end is definitely no loss there. If anything, it's a massive gain. It's always made me laugh since you guys started working on it.
Yeah,
And
and then for sure I would not have picked this name if it was not already there, right? So it's really cool story in the end.
yeah, and it's also funny because it's one of these things where like you do very serious work around security of Bitcoin. It reminds me of this company called Meow. Meow helps like corporates put their treasuries into Bitcoin. And the guy who runs that show is like, yeah, we turn up at these meetings with bankers, and we're like, no, like we do serious security work. Yeah, the company's called Meow, and you can't change it now because it's just done. But serious work. And well, I guess wizards are kind of serious, especially if you're on their bad side. Let's move on though. uh, let's start for the listeners just from the ground up, because for a lot of folks, they don't really know what Bitcoin is at like the code level. They don't know that Bitcoin is upgradable in certain ways, and that upgradability opens up new functionality over time. So you said before, like back in the day when you're doing what were called hardware wallets are not called that now. You've been around the space for a long time. Can you kind of hold the hand, let the folks listening know what Bitcoin is, and then like how it can be upgradable, and then we're going to talk about Miniscript.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. I can't explain everything about Bitcoin, but
No.
yeah, the one thing I guess most of your listener will have heard is that Bitcoin works with keys, public keys, private keys, cryptography, and so that's basically that. You don't have an account in Bitcoin. You hold keys, and then with these keys, you're able to spend some money that is living basically on this thing called the blockchain, right? So you have this one big ledger that records every single Bitcoin that exists and every single transaction that's been done on it. And then your keys can unlock some of these and be able to send them or assign them to someone else. So the Bitcoins are always living in this, ledger that we call the blockchain. They're never leaving it. The only thing that's outside is your keys, and you should keep those very securely because anyone with your keys can move your coins. So that's the idea of Bitcoin. Now, the upgradability, there are some things we, like everyone using Bitcoin, if you don't want to change or are pretty sure will never change. One of them is the number of Bitcoin in existence. So there are going to be 21 million Bitcoin only, not one more. That's social consensus. It's just everyone agrees that this will not be changed. And if someone tried to change it, which is possible, nobody will run with their version of Bitcoin. We will keep ours because why would we believe in them creating money out of thin air? So that's really the thing. But it is technically possible, right? So if people agree that Bitcoin is now something different, it is. It's just a construct, if you want. Now, from the technical perspective, upgrading Bitcoin is very difficult if you want to add functionality to it. because you need to have this kind of majority. It's not really majority, but it's a complicated story. Anyways, you need to convince most people that your changes are not going to hurt the network. They are not going to hurt the people using it, and especially their money, right? The value in their money. And so in Bitcoin, we take a very careful approach, and so that's why the changes are very slow. They take many years to be reviewed, to be vetted by the community, by the technical community, and over years, then they may be implemented into the protocol itself once we are really sure they don't hurt the network. They only bring new things. So that's why Bitcoin is kind of slow to evolve, but when it does, you can know for pretty much sure that it's done in a safe way, and it's not going to break everything. So that's why Bitcoin is still considered by a lot like something that doesn't move, because they don't really see the move on a day-to-day or month-to-month basis. But it is really moving. If you compare Bitcoin 5 years ago to Bitcoin today, it's a very different, very different beast. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit like the tectonic plates. You don't perceive them moving, but if you wind the clock back far enough, you see very obvious changes. But yeah, if nobody's tracking it in real time, or not like they don't have special equipment to do so, yeah, it feels like it doesn't move, but it does. What were the changes that were incurred? I feel like it feels like it was yesterday, but it was probably 18 months ago. Were the changes that paved the way for Miniscript? And you'll have to help me here, because I thought that the Taproot changes put in place what's required for Miniscript to work, but I look to you to clarify that topic, because that's the name of the show. And also, you've been working with it in depth. So I defer to you.
Yeah, and actually, no, they're not related. So Miniscript, conceptually, Miniscript is not really a change in Bitcoin.
Okay.
That's one thing that people don't really see. So we have Bitcoin, the protocol, and then you have, Bitcoin Core. That's one of the implementation, one of the software implementing this protocol. And Bitcoin Core also happens to be a wallet where you can have, you can use your Bitcoin. So Bitcoin Core has a lot of things running in parallel. You have the protocol, you have, your nodes, you have your wallet. Everything is packed into the same thing. Miniscript is more on the wallet side of things. So it's not a change in the protocol. It's a change into how your wallet can understand what script it's using. So what condition it's using to unlock this money you have on the blockchain. So from the network perspective, from the blockchain perspective, there is no change. It's still the same old school script that's running. But now to understand this script, we have this layer on top that's called Miniscript that's much clearer, kind of humanly readable, much more than the old script that we talk about opcodes sometimes. That's very much assembly language. It's machine language. It's not for humans to understand. When Miniscript is much clearer, if you show it to someone that is technical, they will be able to understand what's actually happening there. And so this Miniscript thing is very useful for backups and compatibility between wallets as soon as you touch something more than just one single key. So if you do multi-signature, having multiple keys required to sign to be able to move your coins, already there you have enough complexity that without a proper standard or a proper format, people will lose money. And so Miniscript is one of these things. Taproot, on the other hand, is a change in the protocol. It's a big change in the protocol that let us use different type of cryptography, Schnorr signatures. And with these new type of cryptography, we can also do some more cool stuff. Like we can hide different level of scripts. So some conditions might be visible to an observer on the blockchain, but the ones you're not using, if you have multiple conditions in your script, let's say either I sign with key A or with key B, if I actually sign with key A, an external observer will only see that. And before Taproot, we didn't have this. Before Taproot, you had to reveal the entire script, and then you say which part of the script you use. But for privacy, it's pretty bad. So yeah, Taproot is a big change in terms of privacy for that. But also you can compress your transaction because you don't have to reveal everything, and so it's going to be cheaper to use as Bitcoin transactions in the future. And Miniscript works without Taproot,
Okay.
and it also works with Taproot. So yeah, it's a different thing.
Yep, great. Excellent, because there you go. The listeners should be familiar now with like layering in this ecosystem, and the base layer Bitcoin as you say, it's very hard to change. It does at certain points after a lot of deliberations and testing. Miniscript is different. It's built, well, you could say it's built on or it interacts with the base layer. I don't know how you put it technically, but the point is it's
Yeah,
separate.
yeah. It's more from it's from the wallet perspective. There is no network for Miniscript or anything like that. It's just an abstraction, if you want, of the script that Bitcoin uses.
Cool. So let's then go into kind of the so what in essence. So Miniscript allows you to do certain things. You've mentioned there's some elements around multi-signature transactions. You can start with that, but I think the listeners will be more interested in hearing about like what can I do or what does it open up to me in terms of potential use cases. So I leave it to you, but let's bring it back to kind of like the practical for the people who might use. Well, they'd use Miniscript by default, but they'd use services that utilize Miniscript, which is you're amply informed about.
Yeah. So Miniscript is always going to be something for the developers, the ones building your wallet, not really for the user. But it enables a lot of things, especially around safety. So as soon as you start using something that's not single sig, as I was saying, you have some complexity into, if it's a multi-sig, 2 of 2 keys. You need to know which key go first, right? Basic stuff. But even that, if you don't write it up somewhere, you get different addresses, Bitcoin addresses, if you exchange, like if you swap the order of the keys. And so as soon as you start adding more complexity, more keys, more, and or conditions, time locks, things like that, you have so many ways of putting them together that you pretty much reach, infinity number of combination, and so you are never going to be able to find your coins again. If you don't use something like Miniscript that is basically describing exactly how to put all of these things together, and then you know for sure that if you bring the same wallet, like your backup of your wallet, to a different software, you will find exactly the same coins in the same way. You're never going to have to think, oh, is this backup compatible with this one, and things like this. So this is really the main thing. It's for the developers to be able to make sure that the way they implement things is going to be compatible with others. And that is actually the reason why we never really saw a lot of complexity in Bitcoin wallets. You had single sig and some like advanced user are using multi-sig, but that's it basically, right? We never pushed further than that because it was just so complicated to kind of build a standard around it, that it would just be a foot gun. You have very few wallets that could do time locks, so when a key is not valid before a certain time has passed. So doing time locks before, you wouldn't do it. It was always possible in Bitcoin. It was so risky to do it, that developers wouldn't do it just because people would lose money because of backups, because of things like that. Now with Miniscript, it's really safe to do so. The Miniscript is just defining all of these conditions, and you can import it in a different wallet, and you will be able to recover it. So that's really the main thing. It's a safety thing. You know that if you are using a wallet that handles Miniscript, you can do as complex stuff as you want. It will be safe. Then there is another thing that's not really used yet. It's the composability of Miniscript. So that means that it's kind of fragments, and you can take something that's already Miniscript and you can add it to another one or inside another one, and you can kind of plug them into each other like that. And that's really cool because it will create a lot of intercompatibility between services that we don't have really today. So for example, today you use a custodian, you choose your custodian. You don't take 2 of them or something. But with Miniscript, it's super easy to have, multi-sig of different custodians, or even having things like, I'm using this custodian, but in case they go offline, then I switch to a different one. But you predefine all of that in advance. And so being able to plug and play all of these different services, insurance, time locks, multi-sig, whatever you want, is going to be a big deal. And Miniscript really allows you to do that.
Cool. Simplifying complexity, composability, so things can speak to one another. Let's bring it to a use case like so. We can set it up. I know you've got some scenarios in your head. You've mentioned time locks. You've mentioned multi-sig. Let's unpack them. So the time lock is there's a certain amount of time that elapses before you're able to use Bitcoins in really blunt terms. I know that it's more complicated than that. And then the multi-sig part is that for people to actually use the Bitcoins, You can have multiple people doing it potentially with different wallets. Again, I'm really trying to simplify it, but maybe we use a scenario where somebody would want their Bitcoins to be locked up for a certain amount of time, or they might want them to unlock after a certain amount of time, and they might want multiple parties to do that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So yes, we can do that.
No biggie.
Yeah, you can do that. So in Bitcoin, we have two types of time locks. We have the absolute time lock, meaning you set a specific date in the future, like a day, time, hour, right? And at this time, you will be able, like, you make a key become valid to spend these coins. If it's the only key in the wallet, that means that the funds will not be able to move before. And when you reach that date, you can move them. By wallet, we mean already a bunch of Bitcoin addresses, and you can receive a Bitcoin different times into it. It's not one address only. It's it could be as many addresses as you want. A wallet is just a group of addresses that are linked to the same script, so to the same key. In this example, we would have the script that says, the time lock makes this wallet or this key only valid after 2025, 1st of January 2025. So I can receive as many Bitcoin, as many transactions as I want in this wallet. And on the 1st of January 2025, my key will be able to spend them, but not before that. And if that's the only condition I have, nobody will be able to do anything about it. And you need to wait until this time, right? For multi-sig, it's kind of similar story without the time. So you define your conditions before. You say, for example, typical example for a small business, you have 2 out of 3, so you have 3 people in your people controlling the funds. Let's say the 3 managers in the company, and 2 of them are required to sign for any money to move, and that's very frequent in business, even in traditional banking, that you
Yeah.
don't want a single person to be able to move the funds, especially larger amounts. So in Bitcoin, we can do that. We can do this in a strict way, like 2 of 2. So you'll require at every moment you need these 2 people to sign, but usually you do like 2 out of 3. So if one of them lose the key or something, the funds are not lost, right? So it's good to have a margin, a threshold, just to avoid loss of funds. And so now what we can do also is that with the time lock, you don't have to have only use the time lock only as a way to prevent the movement of funds, because you can have multiple conditions. You could say this key, like the key A, is able to move the funds at any time, even right now, but the key B is only going to be able to move them after 2025, right? So this is pretty cool as well. It enables a lot of different use cases that could be used as a recovery key in case something happens, or it could be some kind of a business agreement that can be used to build escrow services on Bitcoin, for example. There's a lot of things we can build. And then I was talking about another type of time lock, which is the relative time lock. And this one starts counting at the time you receive funds. And so every time you move your funds, it will reset this timer. So instead of saying 1st of January 2025, I'm going to say 6 months. And if I stop using my wallet for 6 months, then my other key will become valid. But if I keep using it, it keeps pushing this 6 months, forever. So it's a very different mechanism.
So, Kevin, you've explained time locks, you've explained multi-sigs and how some people might use them. You're right. Like custodians might want to have multiple parties signing transactions. That's certainly what we see from what we do at WisdomTree. The time locks there, yeah, you might want to have it so if the keys are lost or even stolen, really, that they eventually become active in the future. So, like, let's run a thought experiment here. I'm Evil Ben. Yeah, it's my alter ego, and you're Kevin, who has a lot of Bitcoin. And well, I come and kill you, Kevin. And this is my alter ego. I wouldn't do that in real life, of course. But if you hadn't thought this through, and I just came in and did what I did, and then I took your private keys, Bitcoins are effectively mine now. Though I might have jail time coming, depending on where what happens. In this situation, basically, run through. You could set it up so essentially the keys wouldn't be valid even if I got them, and then you could
I
set it
cannot.
up. No, right?
No, Bitcoin cannot invalidate something that has become valid already.
Okay.
It can only do the opposite. It can make things valid in the future. But
Okay.
if I can sign a transaction right now, this transaction should be acceptable by the Bitcoin network at any time. If it was valid now, it should be valid in the future. That's one of the requirements in Bitcoin currently in its architecture, is that if something is valid now, it should be valid in the future as well, just for compatibility issues. To make this kind of stuff that you want, that we would want, for example, trying to invalidate something, we may be able to build this when we have covenants in Bitcoin.
Okay.
Covenants are an entire different thing again. They are a very big change in Bitcoin, in the protocol. We don't have them right now. There is a lot of research, and even what we can do with them or what we cannot is not very clear. It depends on the type of covenant.
Cool. So then let's think about the multi-sig way in which you avoid evil Ben getting you. You would have different parties, right? Potentially. You could have your next of kin, your lawyer, your accountant, so on and so forth. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, then you could have, so each one of them has a different period of time until they're able to use the wallet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So you can keep putting them one after the other. That's really cool. It's like different fail-safe. Same with the multi-sig. You could have a very large multi-sig at the top, 5 of 5 that become a 4 of 5, that become a 3 of 5, that become 2 of 5, or whatever you want. And this is really cool. But yeah, so many ways to use it. It's also useful when you want to be, let's say, in self-custody right now, but have a recovery possible with a custodian in the future. So instead of just signing up for a multi-sig custodian, like there are some today that will get 1 or 2 keys. You might have heard of Casa, you might have heard of Unchained. These guys typically get 1 or 2 keys, but not enough to move your funds by themselves. You need to be present, right? But with the Miniscript stuff, you can have different things where they don't have any key valid right now. And it's only if I lose mine that then there can become valid. And so you can do really cool stuff like this. Yeah.
Okay. So how does this tie in with Liana? Does it tie in? And so
Yeah.
tell people a little bit what Liana is. It's got a nice name, like Wizardsardine. So it's related. Just give us the quick brief on it, because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, so Liana is basically the first Bitcoin wallet that lets you do this kind of stuff in a nice way. So we really focus the user experience and the user interface to be built around these recovery keys. So you have it as a completely normal Bitcoin wallet. The user experience is the same as using any other desktop Bitcoin wallet. You have your keys to spend your money on a day-to-day basis. You can do single sig, you can do multi-sig if you want. Up to you. But on top of that, when you set it up the first time, it will ask you what kind of recovery methods you want. So you can have a different key that maybe you store at the bank in a safe deposit box that become your recovery key. So it doesn't have to be a third party, right? But the difference is that right now it's time locked. So even if the bank managed to open it or somebody managed to get access to this key, they cannot do anything with your coins, because as long as you have the other keys, they can't do anything. So you could move the funds if you see somebody accessed it, right? So this is much safer than keeping a backup somewhere else like we do today, maybe at home, maybe elsewhere. And if somebody finds this backup, you're screwed. So having the time lock there is very, very useful. But you can also have then another layer in case I die. So I would die, too bad. My backup at the bank, maybe there is a PIN code on it, maybe it's encrypted, maybe my family doesn't know it's there. So I want another layer after the expiration of the previous one that will actually make the keys of my family valid for my wallet. So only after a while, after I died and I stopped using my wallet, obviously, then they can recover these funds. And that's pretty cool. And then you could say that if they are not even able to recover my coins, we put another key again after with a custodian. So this custodian could help them recover the funds if they are unable to do it themselves.
Yeah. And it's
And you can do
interesting
all of
there.
that in Liana. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting there is you've introduced all these other parties, right? So like traditionally with the whole Bitcoin thing, it's like, no, I'm self-custodying it and I'm putting the keys in a safe place with redundancy, and I've got to secure the keys, right? Because as you say, even if someone gets the backup, you're in big trouble. Or you can encrypt the backup, and then if they know the key to the back, anyway, it totals all the way down. But basically introducing the idea that the custodians essentially become one of the parties in the worst case scenario, or a bank. The insurance companies would look at this and think like, Like literally no one can use it except like parties that we trust. It of course introduces new trust assumptions into the model, but especially as we're watching kind of the institutionalization of Bitcoin, I can imagine there are a lot of people out there now who have had trouble wrapping their heads around it. But it kind of like, as you said earlier, you've not just abstracted away from the wallet itself and up, but like even for them, it abstracts away all of the complexity involved in essentially managing keys, which is funny, right? Because the custodians are essentially going to become cybersecurity companies. And
Yeah, it's a very good point, and also like it complex like it makes some complexity for the custodians to evaluate the risk they are taking, because it's very different from right now. So right now, typically a BitGo type custodian or whoever, right? A custodian with large amount of money on keys that are valid right now, they have to secure their keys as the value it's worth, because the risk is that if somebody accesses them right now, they are going to empty the accounts and the money is gone. But with something like Liana with a time lock, the keys they are storing, there is no money on it technically right now. So they can actually afford to spend less money in security because there is much less risk as well. There is no incentive to attack them right now. But there will be potentially in the future, if their client lose their keys, then the money becomes like valid there. So there is a much more complex risk valuation there, but it's super interesting.
yeah, and I mean, prior to my life in Wisdom Tree, I used to work in cybersecurity and specifically catastrophic cyber risk, which is you've lost all the data or all the data's been destroyed. What are you going to do? The cloud's gone down. You're in a mess. Anyway, they always had trouble pricing this stuff and thinking through like what measures could be put in place to reduce or mitigate the risk entirely. And in that way, the premiums are meant to go down, or at least claims. Um, so like that kind of stuff, they always had trouble wrapping their heads around it. That's why they used to pay me.
Yeah.
But the world's moved on a lot, and this kind of stuff I can see is one of the things where like it takes away the complexity, abstracts away from the technical stuff, and it does it in a way that's reliable that just didn't exist before. So it's a big step forward.
Yeah, yeah, it is. We really call it a safety mechanism, not really a security tool, although both are kind of related. But it's much more helping on the safety side. Is that all of these disasters you're talking about, disaster recovery, we know it's catastrophic when you lose keys, and we want to make this risk, bearable. And so you're talking a lot to institutions and potentially companies or funds or whatever trust that may have multiple keys. But currently, many of these are still using third-party custodians just because they don't want to take the liability of losing their keys. They don't want this risk to exist and then having to tell their investors or whatever, whoever put money in there, that they screwed up. Because if the custodian screw up, they can just say, we picked the biggest one on the market, nothing we could have done, nothing we could have done better. So liability is not on us. Now with something like Liana, you can actually do both. You can be in self-custody, you have the full control, you don't have the risk of an FTX blowout. You have your keys, right? You completely control them. But even in case of massive disaster, everything, the building burns down and there is a flood and all the backups are wet and not readable, that there is another layer after where you can actually recover your funds if you wait long enough. And this is going to be, invaluable. I really think everyone will use this kind of model in the future. But again, educating all of these companies that right now they can go back to the self-custody thing because liability is not only on them, can be a really good thing.
Yeah, and because it's open source software, it's stuff that like anyone could use. I could use it right now if I wanted, but the idea that it can scale like that to even like the biggest banks could potentially use it, and it's robust and it works is really impressive stuff. Look, we're coming up on time, so usually we finish out the episodes by asking guests about what they've got their eye on the future, what's interesting or exciting. Is there anything that you're particularly looking forward to? And it could be with as you build out Liana, but it could also just be like in general.
Yeah, there is so much. One thing I'm
Right?
not looking forward to is regulation. So we're based in Europe. It's super complex. The people who wrote MiCA, the European regulation around this, they they don't get it. They might get some of it. They are starting to get, the concept of a private key and a public key, and that kind of makes a wallet. When you start layering things like, I have my keys, I'm in self-custody, but if I lose things, then there is a third party that has maybe one of three keys that are necessary to recover my funds. This completely breaks the way the law is prepared, and they are just not ready for it, and they can't, because this space is moving very fast. How can they write laws that are going to last for 50 years plus on things that are moving so fast? And so right now, everything that's been written in MiCA, for example, would prevent businesses like us to offer more safety to our clients. Typically, saving one key in recovery for our clients right now would be impossible, because we have to enforce AML/CTF, and so we need to prevent them from sending funds, but we can't prevent them. The key we have is not valid right now. It's a recovery key, but still, in the law, it's not like that. It doesn't exist. Time locks is not in MiCA, and so this is one thing I'm not looking forward to. It's just there is so many cool things that we can do to protect people that is just not possible because of the current regulation.
Yeah.
In the things I'm actually excited for, we were talking about Taproot. Taproot is going to be, it's not really used right now. Very few people use it. But when we use this kind of stuff with Liana, which currently isn't, we are waiting for a new change in Bitcoin Core. As soon as we have Taproot in Liana, people using Liana will have better privacy, and they will not have to reveal that they are using Liana. Currently, when you use Liana, people looking at the blockchain will know you're using Liana. It's okay, but we can do better. And with Taproot, it will be completely indistinguishable that you're using Liana or not, and that's really good, I think. Yeah.
Great. We touch on lots of subjects, some of which I know that the listeners like to think about. And I mean, they're always interested in the regulatory landscape, and it's shifting. Even for that space, which moves quite slowly, it's moving relatively quickly. And I appreciate your point that the future is hard to predict. There is so much activity; it's hard to future-proof this stuff. And whoever gets it right is going to like open the door essentially to all kinds of businesses to come and operate there, and of course pay taxes. But those who get it wrong, like it's a bit like getting the internet wrong back in 1994. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly that. There is going to be a lot of opportunities, especially for smaller countries, to do some regulatory arbitrage there. It's not about, not regulating anything. That's not the question. The question is about not preventing people from operating. And this is exactly what's starting to happen in Europe, is that it's not that I need to register to get a license or whatever. It's just that I cannot do what they ask. I just cannot technically follow the law if I want to keep a key, for example, which we're not going to do, because otherwise we would be breaking the law. But it just, I just cannot do things that would be good for everyone. So.
It reminds me of when, because as I said, cybersecurity background, like they would introduce these kind of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. This is in the United States. And basically you'd have these what are called white hat hackers going out there and finding vulnerabilities in software that's open on the internet. And basically they'd say like, hey, you could fix it, and here's how you fix it. And then they get a nice criminal charge against them saying, you're not even allowed to go and probe the software. And it's like, but do you understand that like anyone can do it, and there's malicious people out there who will? So what I'm trying to get out is like the reverse incentive, essentially. We're trying to make the world more secure, trying to make it more private, more reliable. And yeah, misguided things like that can really kind of make the problem worse, actually. But anyway, we've touched on so many subjects that I love talking about. Bitcoin security, privacy. It's been really an absolute pleasure, Kevin. But unfortunately, we're at time now. Where can people find you on the interwebs?
So the website, wizardsardine.com, that's like the place where we push the things we're building. Otherwise, Twitter or X or whatever you call it. Same thing, we have an account for Wizardsardine. We don't have an account for Liana. We just consider Liana to be a product. So if people want to know about all of the updates, at Wizardsardine.
There you go, folks. Well, with that, we're out of time. I hope everyone's found today's podcast useful and informative. Wisdom Tree Prime, if you're in the US, check it out on the app stores. You can find me at Benjamin Dean on the Bird app. Thank you very much for listening, folks, and we'll see you next time.